wonderful to be here for the 10th edition of the LLF, and it's very special, particularly to be here to talk about this book. It's a book that's very close to my heart, and it's about someone who was very close to me, a very special and unique human being. And instead of me telling you about her in some sort of sentences copy and pasted from the internet, I'd like to actually ask Fatima's family to introduce her to you guys. Farazeh, this is Farazeh, Fatima's mother. And,
hello everyone.
And Mohammad, Fatima's brother. And today they're going to introduce Fatima to the audience and tell us a little bit about who she was. Farazeh, would you like to start by telling us what she was like as a child and, you know, when she discovered her passion for food and cooking?
Sure. Thank you so much for being here today. For those of you who may not have known Fatima, just a little introduction. She was born in Lahore, went to school in Karachi, and then subsequently left for New York to pursue culinary education. She went to the Culinary Institute of America in upstate New York. Subsequently after that, she lived in New York for almost 10 years, worked in various restaurants, was a fierce competitor, loved cooking shows, competed in many cooking competitions, and in 2017, she was diagnosed with a very rare form of bone cancer called Ewing sarcoma, and she battled that very bravely for almost 14 months till we lost her in January of 2019.
Yeah, I think for me, the memories that I have of my sister, and to be honest, I think I only now really appreciate just how special she was. But typical brother and sister relationship that I had with her, Fatima was sort of very adventurous. Anything I would try and do, she'd try and talk me, which was just her personality. And I have very fond memories of watching her grow up. She was, like Mom said, she was very feisty, fiery. She was very, she had her own standards, I think, Fatima, from a very young age. And she just, I think for her, borders, boundaries, sort of rules, they were all a bit flexible. So for Fatima, she just went for it. And I saw that. I saw how she did that. She was always better at school than I was, which I resented a little bit when I was younger. But she really was somebody who kind of, I think, showed us both what it means to live and to live a good life. Some of that is in this book, and some of that is what we want to share with everybody today as well. So,
thank you. So I'd like to begin with so just to lay out before I actually start, the book is almost like a conversation between Farazeh and Fatima, with chapters that move from Farazeh's voice to Fatima's voice. And I'd like to start, if you could, Farazeh, read us a bit from the foreword.
Certainly, yes, absolutely. So this was when Fatima first came to me to kind of let me know that she wanted to write a book. There she was, huddled up under the covers. She looked so small, too small for the enormity of pain she was learning to live with. An image of her as a baby flashed in my mind, as it often did during her illness. It was my way of holding on to time. If I thought of her as a baby, then I had 29 years left with her. I noticed that the trash can that would normally be in our laundry room was by her bed. My heart sank. She wouldn't have said anything, but I knew Fatima had suffered all night. She had probably not slept a wink, had been in pain and did not want to worry me. I went back to the kitchen. She must have sensed me as the water came to a boil, and Fatima hobbled out on her crutches. "Mom," Fatima said, I want to write a book. Only Fatima could have hatched an ambitious plan on a night when she was constantly vomiting. I think that's a great idea, Tatu, I said encouragingly. She paused. No, Mom, I need your permission. Permission? You don't need my permission, Fatima. Write whatever you want to write about. Go ahead. She shook her head. Well, for this one, I do. Why? Because I don't want to just write any book. I don't want to write about my cancer. I want to write an honest book about my life, my story. She continued, and I will be gone, Mom, and you will have to bear the brunt of it. I blinked at her. Did she really think I had anything left to lose after her? I reached out and, as always, put her hand in my own and repeated what had become a chant that we both so desperately wanted to believe. It's okay, my Tatu, it's okay. We held each other, rocking back and forth. She felt my tears on her shoulders as I felt hers in my bones.
I'd like to read a couple more paragraphs from this section. And in that spirit, this book contains many truths, painful and inconvenient truths, truths that are often brushed under the carpet, truths that we would do anything to believe were lies. How many of us deny our truths, our realities, our honesty, because we fear judgment? How many of us have tried so hard to protect our sons and daughters that we lose sight of what really matters? I spent so much of my time with Fatima wanting to protect her from becoming a topic of judgment by others. I have lived my own life in fear of this, but not my Fatima. Fear didn't have a chance with her, never did. She came from me. But Fatima wasn't afraid to break invisible boundaries and always followed her heart. I think that the interesting thing about this passage is the idea of permission. You know, in the West, the assumption is that you're supposed to be able to tell the story of your life, personal details, if you want to. But I think that it's much more complex in our part of the world. And the idea of permission, of giving yourself permission, and of, having the permission of the people whose stories are intertwined with your own, I think it has a totally different meaning here. Farazeh, would you like to talk to us a little bit about this? Because I think you had a very interesting conversation with a journalist about this when you were promoting the book.
Yes, that's right. So it was very interesting because while I guess in our culture permission and to seek permission from your adults is very much part of who we are and our value systems and so on, I think for the West it was definitely something that stood out to them. And one of the first questions I was asked was that, why did she need your permission to write the book? So I kind of felt that Fatima had a two-pronged sort of reason or approach to why she needed my permission. One, of course, very importantly, was because, I was her parent, and because she deeply cared about me, and I think because also perhaps being that single parent who kind of looked after the children, she kind of saw me as someone who it mattered to her what I thought and how I felt. That was important to her. And I think she wanted to be comfortable enough to know that it was okay for her to be able to go on to write this book. And simply because she wanted to write, as you may have just heard me say, it was an honest book. And honesty is not always pleasant. Honesty can be painful. And while her objective nowhere along the way was to hurt anybody or be insensitive or unmindful towards anyone, because remember, this is not fiction, this is about a real person, these are real people, these are real relationships. And so obviously, in the course of being honest, she was going to unfold and say perhaps things that other people would not want to acknowledge or not want, to understand. And she also knew that she wouldn't be here, really. It would then be on my shoulders, and I would have to carry this through. And so hence that responsibility was on her, feeling that responsibility that, well, I want to write this honest book. I want this book to be, honest in every way, speak the truth in every way, talk about my life, relationships, people, choices, everything as honestly as possible. But then there would be consequences, perhaps, of that honesty. And, and hence she was afraid that I would have to bear the brunt of those consequences. And hence she wanted to be comfortable and wanted to seek my permission for it. Mohammad, would you like to contribute to this?
It's also kind of interesting, and I wonder if Mohammad, you can talk a little bit about allowing yourself permission to talk about those things. It's not, I think it was very important for her to have your permission, but I think it's also important to allow yourself that space to go there, to the painful things, and to say, you know what, I want to talk about this. And maybe Mohammad, you can talk to us a little bit about how that experience was for Fatima.
I mean, sure. I think there's a lot of power in truth. And I think that as we were kind of approaching putting this book together after Fatima had passed, there were lots of things that we really had to sort of confront. And I think for us, we had to keep coming back to this idea and this commitment to being honest and being as real as possible, because that's where we feel the power really lies. So one of the big things that was really important for Fatima was to make change. And for her, it was always about all the things that she would have ended up doing in her life that would have led to that. I think when she sort of distilled the vision, I guess, of all these goals that she had into this book, it was about how do we make sure that it actually does make change. And so for us, it was very important to kind of confront lots of things, I think not only for ourselves, but also for everybody else, for the benefit of everybody else. I think lots of things happen in all sorts of families, all sorts of homes, and I guess our culture, it's very easy to just brush things aside, put them under the carpet, not talk about them. And I think it was also about leading the way. I think Fatima, for us, for me at least, she was a leader. She led the way in many ways. She got into food and cooking and being a chef before it was sexy, before it was cool, before there were TikToks and all of this, right? So that whole scene and where it's come now to where it was when she started, very, very different. And so she led the way, and I think I have to kind of, whenever I'm feeling a little lost, I remember what Fatima did, and I use that as my prompt. So it was really about taking her lead and saying, you know what, we're going to go ahead and talk about these things. And what's the fear, right? Because it comes back to me about fear as well. Yeah. It's really about, and the perspective, I think, especially seeing Fatima and witnessing what we had to witness, sort of this life passing, it makes you think about lots of things. And I think for me, the thing that I kept coming back to was like, okay, when we make decisions, when we pick and choose how honest to be, how not to be, how vulnerable you should make yourself, how much you should put yourself out there, it's the flip side of that is there's a fear of like, well, what if something bad happens? Yeah. And so this idea of what if something bad happens, I think for us at least, and for me, I kind of keep having to remind myself that it's like, so what? Yeah. Right? So what? I saw my sister's life sort of just go like that. Our lives, I think we forget just how fragile they are, how tomorrow, we don't even know the next 10 minutes. And we constantly forget. And there's a value in forgetting that, because we're going to be sort of catatonic if we don't. We have to continue with our lives, but that's how fragile everything is. So When you're confronted with something, when you feel like, oh, should we do it, should we not, just ask yourself, why not? Like, what's the fear? What's the worst that's going to happen? So for us, I guess, coming and touching on that point about honesty, I feel it was important for us to kind of stick to our guns and just,
Yeah.
you know.
And you know, just connected to this idea that we're talking about being honest, about giving yourself permission, I think for women it weighs much more heavily on our shoulders, because I think for men, and particularly in this society, permission is just granted to you for so many things, and we have to fight for it, we have to ask. And you know, Fatima, this book is very much centered around women and female relationships, and you know, the 3 generations of women, Farazeh, her mother, and Fatima. And I'd like to, if you feel up to it, Farazeh, if we could read that, or Mohammad, would you like to read it?
Sure.
Yeah, the passage from page 11, that little bit.
So this is a chapter that Fatima wrote early in the book, and this is one of the last paragraphs from it. If I were to pick one incident that altered the trajectory of our family and of myself, it would be this: the death of my dashing grandfather, a man who I never even met, because, of course, my story is not only my own. It couldn't be. My story began long before I did, with those who came before. The Nawab great-grandparents, the enterprising grandfather and his beloved wife, my Nano, and most significantly, my mother. She, more than anyone else, made me who I am and painted the outlines of my life. As I often remind her, she and I are for a reason.
So Fatima grew up spending a lot of time with her grandmother, and you know, she had for much of her childhood, she had a single parent, her mother. And I just want to talk a little bit about that dynamic, about Nano's role in bringing up Fatima, and the importance of these female relationships and the thread that runs through it.
Yes. So, so obviously Fatima and Mohammad spent a lot of time with my mother earlier on when I returned from the US. And at that time, I guess, you know, I had come back and I was just trying to start my work and get back on my feet. And while I was caught up and busy with work, Mummy was really their primary caretaker. And I think what Fatima speaks of in this passage when she talks about how passing away of her grandfather changed the trajectory for generations to come is really coming from the fact that obviously our father was a very patriarchal sort of man, and my mother, Fatima's grandmother, was very much a homemaker, lady of the house, and pretty much led this life where, you know, stay home, look after husband, cook, look after children, and so on, which so many of us basically do, which is a lot of hard work. And then I guess hence, you know, for all of us, you know, I grew up in that sort of culture. And the effect and impact of that for me was that would eventually also be my role. So when it would be time for me, I would be married and then obviously move on, be somebody's wife. There was no question of, you know, maybe work or further education, etc. And I guess all of this kind of propelled because of the passing of my father. And it kind of heightened my mother's anxieties of, well, you know, now there's no father on the head, I have 3 daughters, what's going to happen, let's get her married, and so on. And Fatima saw all of that. The thing was that I think for me, the reaction that had on me was that I wanted to make sure that my children, particularly my daughter, would get an education, would get the opportunity to go to college to pursue her dreams, to pursue her career, whatever her passions and dreams were. But having said that, I think that in all of this, like Mohammad had said, that the common thread that runs universally. Mohammad, you wanted to take over from here?
Yeah, sure. We were talking about this a little earlier, and I think the thing that I really take away from this reflection that Fatima had was understanding where you're situated in your circumstances, in your context, right? There's a sort of thread, and to some extent, if you read the book, you'll see that there's a parallel going. There's my mother's life and my mother's sort of perspective, and then there's Fatma's life and her perspective. And you can see how they both affect each other. And the thing is, it doesn't end or start there. It keeps going. There's layers to it. So my mother's mother, and so on and so on. And so really, the things that tend to happen in our families, these sort of events, the choices that people make, what falls out, you can sometimes draw a straight thread to where you're at this point in your life and how you've ended up finding yourself there. And I think it's always important to remind yourself of your greater context, because you have to understand, I think, in a lot of ways, the thread doesn't end there. It continues. So the choices you will make, the way that you approach different things, how you are affected by your past and what you take forward, it echoes and echoes and it echoes, and it continues to do that. So one of the things that I really take away from this reflection that Fatima had was when she says that it starts way before me, my life, is that reminding ourselves about this idea of continuity, of connection, of this thread that continues through our generations, and also reminding ourselves of our own role in it, really, because like I said, it doesn't stop with us, it continues. So it's about the choices you make, the consequences of those choices, and so on.
And she was deeply influenced by my mother also, obviously because she spent a lot of time with Mummy, and because Mummy was a fabulous cook, always in the kitchen, and that was so close to Fatima's heart. And Fatima, from a very young age, was so connected to food and so passionate about cooking. I think there was a closeness that Fatima felt to her nano, which was because of the fact that Mummy allowed her in the kitchen. She was with Mummy all the time. She was almost like Mummy's little sous chef, and so Mummy had a great influence in many ways on Fatima.
And her love for food, I think
Yes.
it started with Nano, because there's some lovely passages, we're not going to read them now, about going shopping with Nano in Itwar Bazaar, and her love for like produce and all these things, which are so lovely. But I'd like to spend some time now talking about who Fatima became, and so much of that was that she was a lover of food, a lover of the culinary arts. She was a chef. And I'd like to Farazeh to read through this passage, which I think is such a interesting way, in a very interesting frame on what cooking, food, and that world meant to Fatima, and how it transformed so many things for your family and for her.
Yes, that's right. So I think the thing about food and Fatima was that Fatima found a lot of delight in food. She found a lot of joy in food. There was never any hierarchy for Fatima in food. There was no such thing as expensive versus inexpensive, rare versus common, usual versus or unusual versus typical. It was, for Fatima, food, what Fatima wanted, unexpected, delicious food.
Yeah.
And for her, that's all really that mattered. Food brought her comfort and delight both. And from a very young age, when she was almost 4, by accident she came about. When she was in kindergarten, she came about, her kindergarten teacher who put her up to these little recipes of cooking food. But remember, at that time, Fatima sought that not as just a passion, but it was something that brought joy and delight and comfort to her. So this paragraph kind of shows how she prioritized not just the joy and comfort of food itself, but also the people behind it,
Yeah.
and how that was so important to her. So this paragraph is actually from a chapter where Fatima was visiting us from New York City, and she had come to Lahore, and it was a very dear friend's wedding, and Usman is here in the audience. I saw him. So it was basically his wedding, and she was here for his wedding. And as like any mother of a young girl has aspirations, I, at that point in time, as a mother of a young girl, also had aspirations that my daughter would find a nice, handsome, suitable husband in one of these wedding celebrations and so on. And so, you know, on that particular day, it was, I still remember, it was a dholki and a party or whatever at Usman's. And, you know, I had made sure that she was wearing best clothes, her hair was blow dried, she had had a nice manicure, pedicure, and so on. And so this is the backdrop of this chapter. She was nowhere to be seen. I searched the crowd and finally spotted her talking to this old man, the head cook and meat expert who had spent a lifetime mastering the art of barbecue, particular to the northern region of Pakistan. So this is called, the chapter is called Patatika, and I'm not sure how many of you know about Patatika, but that is, we were introduced to it by my wonderful friend Aftab, who's a lover of basically the Patatika, which is a specialty in the northern areas. And he would often bring these old masters to Lahore for these events, and where they would cook us Patatika. So this is in reference to that, but I will read it further. So pretty much while
The end of page 218.
yeah. So while we were there, and she suddenly disappears, and I'm like kind of searching the crowds, I don't see her, and then I walk out into the patio, and I see Fatima kind of standing where the barbecue angiti was, and talking to this man, and you know, feeling the meat, and you know, completely engaged and engrossed in conversation with him, and asking all sorts of questions about the food and so on. And my instinct at that time was, you know, what are you doing right now? You should be inside. And I quickly grabbed her and I bring her inside. And when we come back, we're standing around the food table, much later. It's dark in that room. I still have a very vivid memory of this. And in that dark room, amongst you know, a crowd of 50, 80 people, this Patatika guy comes in, and he darts and walks straight towards us with a plate of meat in his hand. Just a half an hour before, I had felt it urgent to pull my daughter away from this man to greet my friends. But as I chewed and swallowed and told him how excellent his Patatika was, I realized that the two were exchanging a gift. She was more comfortable talking with him about his food than she was chatting with the Lahore society, catching up on gossip. Fatima probably would say that it was he who had given her a gift. Fatima used to say, "Mom, you taught me to be this way, to be this person. But it's the things she taught me much more than what I taught her." Fatima could always see past a person's class, their dress, the color of their skin. She always only saw the person.
This is so wonderful. Yeah, and it really is who she was, and I think that you know, if we could spend some time talking about the transformative nature
Yes.
of food and her love for it, and how it actually transformed you, your family.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that, Mohammad?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Sure. I mean, I think food is a very powerful, I think, medium. All of us have probably experienced it, whether that's changing the way that you feel in that moment, whether that's giving you respite or peace, or whether that's sort of, I guess, in some ways for Fatima at least, I feel it was a great equalizer. I think for Fatima, as we had talked about before and as Mohammad mentioned, there was no real hierarchy for her in food, and neither was there any hierarchy in terms of who got to enjoy the food, who got to cook the food, who you sat and ate it with, etc., etc. And so for us, I think sometimes even I would struggle seeing the sort of mishmash of Fati's friends in America, because she was working restaurants. Restaurants are full of, you know, people from all sorts of walks of life. And for Fatima, I think she had a very special ability to sort of see through whatever it was that was on the outside. So, and that's something that I really admire about her. And I think food really was a way that she solidified and crystallized that. And I know that we sort of struggled sometimes. I used to always think, like, why is she hanging out with these people? What is she doing over here? Like, why is she not doing that? And then it only came to me later that really for Fatima, it wasn't about any of those frilly details. It was really about who the person was, their essence, their spirit. And I think, to some extent, another reflection in this chapter, so this was a chapter written by my mother, is this really important piece, I think, that I just wanted to talk very briefly about, which is about learning from your children. I think there's this sort of very fixed idea of, we have it in our culture of age and what age brings. And there's some very good parts about that. I think there's some things to really celebrate when we talk about the sort of reverence that we have for our elders, the respect that we give them, the time that we give them, the way that we listen to them. It's sort of, there is also a little bit of a flip side to it. And I think that it's sometimes you get too fixed in this idea of this sort of knowledge coming downwards or wisdom coming downwards, or insight coming downwards. This idea that children are inherently lost without guidance, and they're these sort of like empty sort of innocent vessels that you have to fill to allow them to kind of navigate things in life. I think too often we lose the ability to kind of see through it and learn from the younger people in our society, in our cultures, around us, in our families, including our children. So I think it's kind of, this idea for me was something that hit, for me personally, hit quite close to home, because I saw my mother as well. I saw sometimes the struggles that she may have had with Fatima in her relationship with her, the struggles that I had as well with Fatima, but I suppose they were a little bit different. My dynamic is very different. And I think, you know, she has this reflection and she shares this reflection with the world and with you as the reader. But really, in so many ways, I wish that this was something that came then. Because if it did, perhaps time could have been spent doing other things. Perhaps some of the things that she feels, man, if I could go back and maybe just live those 3 weeks different, or live that 6 months different, do certain things different. It's about this idea of being open to learning from somebody who you think
your children
doesn't necessarily have that.
Yeah.
So in the trajectory of Fatma's life, she goes to CIA and she, you know, works at all these restaurants, and then, you know, she gets her big break. She gets an interview for Top Chef, and you know, it's her moment. It's the time when she's going to finally achieve her dreams, and you know, and it's sadly this happens when we don't know it at the time, but she's not so far away from not being in this world anymore. So, if we could look at that that section,
Yes.
and I think it's Mohammad. Would you read it for us?
Yeah, sure. So, like, okay, I'm gonna quick. Yeah. Okay, so this was, like Z said, she was interviewing with Top Chef. She was literally sitting on a Nano's bed in Lahore, fully dressed up top on the Zoom call, and probably not so appropriate otherwise. Anyway, so she says, yet, when opportunity knocked, I felt oddly distant from my dream, as if the interview was happening to someone else. If I could convince them of my worthiness and pique their interests, competing on the show would catapult my career. Yet, the fading whiffs of our traditional Pakistani supper and my grandmother's signature scent of arthritis cream mixed with mothballs and Chanel No. 5 reminded me where I was and the place to which I always seemed to return. The place carved out for the matriarchs of my family, of my culture, which has never felt comfortable to me. Even so, a future in Pakistan, even if I was never able to fold myself into the shape I was meant to assume here, felt more inevitable than this long shot, this girlish fantasy that suddenly was manifesting right in front of me. After all, who am I to have my dreams come true, I wondered. Fatima, focus. We went through the motions of a classic interview, the headhunter fishing, me embellishing, dodging when necessary. Sometimes holding so much back makes me feel like a phony, undeserving of success or happiness. Again, the ever-nagging question, who am I to have my dreams come true? And then the tiny voice, the same one that came muffled from deep inside my heart and made me sprint the last 50 meters when I had no more energy left to run the race. Why not? The voice of the believer whispered. Why not me?
So we don't have a lot of time left, and so if we could very quickly just talk about what success means in hindsight, and what it meant to Fatima to have these opportunities to be in this place.
So I want to quickly say that for Fatima, cooking wasn't just about the outcome or the product itself. Fatima loved the process of it, which involved the cuts, the burns, the late hours, the grueling physical labor that involved in working in a very male-dominated New York professional kitchen. And so, in terms of as far as the process was concerned, Fatima loved that in every moment of it and wouldn't, I think, give that up for anything in the world. As far as this is concerned, why don't you?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, and I'll try to keep this pretty short and punchy, I think it's about why not, this question of why not. I think a lot of people see Fatima, look at Fatima's life, and they think of her as somebody who's extraordinary. Extraordinary meaning one in a million, very special, kind of gifted. That's somebody else, that's someone out there. And I think what's important to take away from this particular passage is Fatima sharing with you her insecurities, her feeling of being an imposter, of doubting herself, of wondering whether she deserves it. All of these questions that we constantly ask ourselves, it's just like anybody else in any situation, but I want you to also understand what was the difference. And the difference really lies in this question that she had, right? Why not me? And it's really this question that you have to keep coming back to. And it comes back to what I was saying in the start about that fear that you have, about what might happen or what could be the bad thing that happens. I think you need to just sometimes, like Fatima did, put that to the side and just say, you know what, why not? Why can't I be the one who does that? She was the one who did it when she was straight out of college, right out of university. She gets an opportunity to go on the Food Network to the show called Chopped. She was the youngest ever Muslim, brown woman, okay, in the chefing world in that time. I mean, that's the smallest of the small minority, okay? And so this girl, she says, why not? She goes on top and she wins that show. She gets elevated, she understands the power of all of this. And again, you'll find in her story, there's times in her life when she just goes, why not? And I think that's one thing that all of us can really learn from. Next time you think, should I do this? Why not? I'm wearing a delegate badge at the LLF. Like, I feel like a phony, I feel like an imposter, I haven't written a book. But why not? Who cares? Live your life.
So Nanda, this brings us to the end of our conversation today, but we're going to do one short reading, and just to contextualize that, here's a woman who lived a pretty incredible life. Her life was cut very, very short. And so when we look back on all this document of her life, what it all means, why write the book, why the honesty, why, leave this behind. And I'd like to read a passage, with your permission.
Yes.
From the end of the book, in Fatima's voice. It's Fatima's chapter. Instead of my bucket list book, this is the story of my abbreviated life. Short, but nonetheless possessing secret love, joy and pain, adventure and hard work, luck and its opposite. I'm a daughter, a sister, a friend, a Muslim, a Pakistani. I'm a chef. I'm queer, I suppose, if we must find a word to define my attraction to people's spirits rather than the bodies that contain them. I'm a person who is dying. Even now, I don't know how to unravel which of these identifiers is greater or less significant than the others. But the one I want least to be associated with is that I am dying. This book is my way of still fighting, of surviving beyond my expiration date, of hopefully helping other small brown girls who feel strange, who kiss their best friends and find they like it, but in doing so hate themselves due to their desires, to forgive themselves and to be themselves. Perhaps if parents could look at their children and ask, are they kind? Are they giving? Are they honest? And finding that they are, feel there's reason enough to love them. No matter what else they are, then there would be less suffering. This book is the only way I can think of to replace the restaurant I dreamt of opening. A vehicle that could close the gap between colors and faiths, contradict assumptions, teach people tolerance and curiosity about my beloved Pakistan through their taste buds. This is my way of saying goodbye, of letting go, of hanging on. This is my way of being free of judgment, of pain, of cancer, and leading with love even as I take my leave. And just to close off the conversation, I think it would be really nice to just hear a little bit about the process of writing this book, just for a few minutes, and what it meant to Fatima.
Yeah, so I think as the chapter sort of captures, Fatima had lots of dreams, she had lots of goals, and it somehow involved her kind of being around for it. And when she realized that she didn't have the chance, it really was about us trying to figure out a way to still make that happen. And it was a conversation that actually I had with Zahra and Mohsin in New York when they were coming, when they had come for a visit, where Mohsin asked me a question. When I talked about this lofty dream of Fatima's to make a show or write a book or do something like this, Mohsin asked me the same question which I just talked about, which was, why not? Why can't we make it happen? And I think it was really about trying to see, Fatima was facing basically an impossible situation. It was despair, hopelessness. It was like a black hole. You don't really have, the top doctors are telling you that there's no way to go. There's no real option left. And you know that your clock is ticking. Like, instead, now this is Fatima essentially being told her life. Her life is being narrated to Fatima. And she's at the receiving end of other people telling her how her life is and how her life is going to go. And I think this was a fight back for us. This was an opportunity for us to take that and let her drive her own narrative, write her own story. This is about fighting the fact that this is coming for you, and this was Fatma's way of essentially defying it. And so for me, when we were working on this project, it was less about the product, and it was more about the process. And it was, for me, it was about trying to have something to work on that was productive, that allowed her some catharsis, that gives her the opportunity to kind of be looking forward to something. And because there was nothing really to look forward to other than what was coming. So for us, it was really about kind of snatching that back in that moment and seeing how we could conquer it. And in many ways, I think that's really what this is about. Fatima will outlive us all. And in that way, I just was going to say, in that way, she's always here. And so when you pick up this book, it's like you're having a conversation with Fatima. And I'd encourage you all to do that. There's I think Readings has published a local edition, so you should grab a copy. And you should really, I guess, try and extract everything you can from Fatma's story, because there's a lot there. And I'm so proud and so honored to be a little part of that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. It's been wonderful sharing Fatma's story with you today. I really hope you do buy the book. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.